November 18, 2020, the United States Senate Subcommittee on Public Lands, Forests, and Mining discussed Senator Lee's Human-Powered Travel in Wilderness Areas Act, S. 1695. This proposed legislation would remove the blanket ban of bikes in wilderness areas and return wilderness rules to what they were in 1981 when bikes had conditional access. The following are video excerpts from the hearing specific to the Human-Powered Travel in Wilderness Areas Act.
I also want to highlight two bills on the agenda that are important to the people of my home state of Utah. S. 4215, the Bonneville Shoreline Trail Advancement Act, and S. 1695, the Human-Powered Travel in Wilderness Areas Act. Both bills deal with the issue of trail use in federal wilderness areas. An estimated 40 million Americans engage in mountain biking every year. It's the second most popular trail activity in the United States. And Utah's diverse terrain and scenery makes it a world-class biking destination. Although mountain biking is allowed on most public lands in Utah and across the nation, it's restricted inside federally designated wilderness and federally managed wilderness study areas. The Wilderness Act of 1964 prohibits motorized or mechanized transport in wilderness. The Forest Service's first regulations for wilderness were issued in 1966, and they banned only those devices powered by a, quote, non-living power source, close quote, thus allowing for human-powered transport, like bicycles. It was not until the 1970s that the Forest Service changed its regulations to prohibit bikes in wilderness. The Department of the Interior has had a similar story. My bill, S. 1695, would address this issue by amending the Wilderness Act to ensure that the rules restricting mechanical transport do not include forms of human-powered, non-motorized travel. Additionally, the bill would grant federal land managers at the local level the authority to determine whether, where, and when to allow non-motorized travel over existing particular routes.
The Human-Powered Travel in Wilderness Act amends the Wilderness Act of 1964 to create an exception to the current prohibition on mechanical transport in congressionally designated wilderness. The USDA supports increased access to the National Forest System lands and thus supports the bill's intent. We'd like to work with the committee to work through concerns we anticipate in implementing the bill.
S. 1695 would amend the Wilderness Act to authorize the use of non-motorized travel in designated wilderness area. The administration has placed a high priority on increasing public use and enjoyment of our federal land. S. 1695 aligns with this priority by providing greater access and recreational opportunities on public land, and the department supports the bill.
I also want to ask you about the Human-Powered Travel in Wilderness Areas Act, S. 1695. So another approach to solving some of the access issues at BST is to ease the nationwide ban on bicycles inside of wilderness. This bill that I introduced, S. 1695, the Human-Powered Travel in Wilderness Areas Act, would amend the Wilderness Act of 1964 to authorize local land managers to determine on a case-by-case basis where and whether to allow mountain bikes to access wilderness. I'd like to thank you, Mr. French, and also you, Mr. Ned, and your respective departments and agencies for your support of this bill. Now, I've heard some concerns that the bill, according to some, would authorize new roads in wilderness. Mr. Ned, can you confirm that my bill would not allow for new roads?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is my understanding. The bill would allow just for the existing, but existing pattern road would not allow for use of new roads.
And would the department seek public input before deciding on the suitability of a trail for other types of motorized travel?
Well, my understanding, there's 2 years for the federal manager at the local level, so that process would include seeking input from stakeholders.
Okay. Mr. French, how prominent has mountain biking become on National Forest System lands compared to the 1960s when logging was a more dominant use?
It's a tremendous use. 3 out of every 4 miles of trail right now that we have, it's like 120,000 miles, currently are open to mountain biking, and we see increased use year after year. It's a dominant expanding use.
Now, is the ban on mountain bikes contained in and directed by the Wilderness Act? And if it's not, could the Forest Service change its regulations on bicycles if it decided to do so?
Our advice and interpretation from our attorneys is that the Wilderness Act specifically calls out mechanized, not allowing mechanized, and there is some court cases that support that, and that was the change in our regulations in the 80s that created that.
The original understanding at the time the Wilderness Act was enacted in 1964 did not encompass bicycles. Is that correct?
Sir, I'd have to get back with you. I know the language in 1964 specifically called out not using mechanized transportation.
Okay. See, my time's expired. Let's see.